Okay, hey everybody, welcome back to our Astro Coffee Hangout. My name is Tony Darnell from deepastronomy.space.com and all the dots that there are. And today we're going to be talking with Brian Keating, Dr. Brian Keating, you guys remember him, who does these interviews every chance he gets. And he's recently talked with Dr. Mario Livio, who's got a live mic. We're going, hey, hang on. We're we're live there, Brian. And so I don't have a way of muting him right now. So all of that is live. Sorry about that. So anyway, he has recently spoke with Dr. Mario Livio. You may remember him. I had him on Hangouts. I guess it was like 3 years ago now, when he came out with his book, Brilliant Blunders. Well, he's recently written another one called Galileo and the Science Deniers. And let me go ahead and bring up Brian so he can introduce himself and what we're going to talk about this week. Hey, Brian, how's it going?
Great, Tony. Can you hear me okay?
Yeah, loud and clear.
Awesome. Yeah. I'm really looking forward to all these. I mean, everyone gets to see how shaggy I'm getting after
you need to do what I did. Haircut. You need to do what I did. Get one of these coronavirus cuts, man.
Oh yeah.
See, I got the trim.
That's nice. You've got excellent uniformity and isotropy.
Yeah, that's exactly. Yes, it's the same everywhere. Just like the expansion of the universe. It's not growing
That's right. It's not inflating like my stomach.
Yes, good example. All right, so tell us what we're going to talk about this week.
Today we're going to talk with about a mutual friend, Mario Livio, who's not only one of the most celebrated, astronomers and popularizers of science, but he's also Italian and a scholar, and he has a new book out, a wonderful new book. I've read all of his books, and his book called Galileo and the Science Deniers is out now. And I had the honor to speak to him last Friday on the weekend before his book was coming out, and kind of got the inside scoop on a bunch of topics that I was always fascinated to learn about. You know, you've read my book, Losing the Nobel Prize, and I have much to say about Galileo as a hero, but also as a human. And I think one of the most interesting parts of our discussion with Mario and me was about Galileo as a father, as a ordinary person, as a subject, as a religious believer, and someone grappling with these twin kind of desires to understand the mind of God, and also to understand the works of nature, and how that was done for the first time. And Mario is, as I said, an Italian. He's an astronomer, and this is the first biography ever written of Galileo by an astronomer. So it has insights that our audience, our mutual audience, will find unique for the first time.
Yeah, well, we have a couple of clips that we can show for the interview itself, and you just tell me when you want me to play them. But I want to let people watching this know I put a link to the full interview in the description box of my video. And if you have not subscribed to Ryan's channel yet, you need to do that. And the link to that is also in the description box. That's what you'll get notified every time he's doing it. When we're done here, we're going to talk about. He has to leave exactly in about 27 minutes. So because he's about to do another interview, which we'll give you a preview of before he leaves. So, all right. So what shall we just start with one of the clips, or do you want to give some more? Because I have some questions about Galileo in particular and what's in the book.
Yeah, let's check out one of the clips. But the thing that I focused on primarily with Mario was trying to be a little bit gently as a friend, but a little slightly adversarial, and asking the questions, that I was hoping would provoke him into answering for the first time. Rather than saying you're so brilliant, which I think he is, but instead of just talking about that, why not say challenge him a little bit? So that was kind of my my attempt here to really get him to open up about how bad is it really? I mean, this word denier has awful connotations, ranging from Holocaust denier to other denying other sort of facts in history. So I wanted to kind of talk about that first, get a sense of why he named the book what he did. So yeah, why don't we go ahead and roll that, and then you can ask a question, and then love answering questions from the audience.
All right, so this will be the book, the one that's called Mario Book Trailer. The book trailer?
Yeah. Okay. I think they're both called that, but yeah, I think we'll see which one this one is first.
All right.
Can you walk the audience through the choice of the cover design? We'll put up a picture of it, and even the title of the book. Let's start there.
Yeah. So, well, the title, you see, this is a biography of Galileo, but because Galileo had to deal with all kinds of science deniers, and because science denialism is, the way I see it, a big problem today, then this is what determined the title, Galileo and the Science Deniers. Namely, it's a biography of Galileo, but with an eye on science denial today. So that's about the title. Concerning the image on the cover, so I chose the very first portrait of Galileo when he was relatively young, probably in his 40s. It was done by an unknown Tuscan painter, but it's the very first portrait known of him. Usually people, are familiar with pictures of him by Sustermans when he was old. Even there is one attributed to Tintoretto when he was sort of middle-aged. This one is the earliest. So that's that. And then there are these. There is this figure of orbits of planets around the sun, and the way the cover was chosen is that his picture is in the middle of that, which makes it look almost as if he is in the bullseye of a target, which kind of describes his life.
Okay, good. So I've got several things I want to approach here. One is about Galileo and the story of Galileo, and the other is about science denialism itself. And so, I'll ask you, Brian, these questions so that you can give me maybe answers in the context of the interview, or what kind of tease us a little bit about what's in the interview. But I'd also like your opinions on this. First of all, I think, and I have learned and read quite a bit about the time in which Galileo lived, and during the very famous trial and all of that stuff that he went under. How accurately do you think we remember that time period where Galileo was promoting the ideas of Copernicus?
Yeah, so the main controversy that he was teaching was essentially whether or not the Earth was the center of the universe. And for reasons, Mario's not a biblical scholar. I'm not a biblical scholar, but I can read ancient Hebrew, and I understand some of the distinction in there. What struck me is that it's interesting to note, and I don't think people have really mentioned this, that there's nowhere in the Hebrew Old Testament that makes a claim that the Earth is the center of the universe. There's one paragraph that seems to suggest that Joshua stopped the sun, which seems to mean that the sun is moving around the Earth instead of the other way around. But anyway, be that as it may, the church was certainly against the Aristotelian model, the Ptolemaic model, that the Earth was going around the sun, because in their mind, things that were close to the center were of the highest value. And you see this in Dante's Inferno and other things that Galileo also lectured on. The controversy was really, elevated to this stage of lore. And there are books written that basically paint a very different portrait from Galileo's. And I'll try to put a link to that in my video at some point. But that it was sort of overblown. And one element of that I challenged Mario on in the interview was, he was allowed to teach, or he was allowed to study the Copernican universe, even by the church, even by the man who later became the Pope, as long as he didn't teach it. And that distinction was crucial, because in the Siderius Nuncius, those words are Latin, and that means starry messenger in Latin, but he wasn't allowed to teach it in Italian. And he found that out in 1616. And the dialogue which really promotes Copernicanism, wasn't published until 1632. So he had 16 years. He wasn't, denied any freedoms. He wasn't edited and censored in the way that we normally think. But Mario goes through this wonderful discussion of the books between the Siderius Nuncius and the Dialogo, and how this is part of a canon that Galileo was really intent on settling Copernicanism once and for all. And the ironic thing is that none of his discoveries really proved that the Earth was going around the sun. They just merely, quote unquote, he's my hero, so I'm saying this again. I try to be provocative. I try to take the Pope's side in things. Ironic for someone who's Jewish, by the way. And I keep pointing out that, I keep saying I'm the devil's advocate, but I'm really the Pope's advocate, just gently, because I think interviews like that are more fun. So I took the Pope side, and your listeners can let me know if I did a good job or not.
Yeah, and I'm glad to hear you say that because there's a lot of my wife. I learned a lot about this after I married my wife, who is not only a Catholic but a theologian, but a philosopher, and she
Oh, wow.
taught me a lot about this history and about what the Catholic Church and the role of the Catholic Church in our scientific history, which is actually quite extensive. And you're
Yeah.
absolutely right. And if Mario mentions this in the book, so is he. Is all this idea that Galileo, that they had, the Pope and the Catholic Church had no problem with what he was doing. What they just didn't want him to do was to try and interpret it in terms of the Bible. What does this all mean? Because
Yeah.
at the time, the church was under a lot of pressure because they had the Reformation going on. They were fighting for their survival. They just wanted Galileo to stop, right? And just not,
Yeah. Not proselytize for this.
That's right.
And he was deeply religious himself. And what's so interesting?
That's right.
You go through and you read the book and you find out Mario's quoting all these Jesuit astronomers.
That's right.
You're like, well, if they were really anti-science, the way that some people are, in some sense, why were they employing astronomers, effective, not astrologers, actual astronomers who were tracking movements of things in the heavens for specific scientific purposes? As I always say, if you do, I never try to convert people. I never try to make a case for any type of religious practice or secularism whatsoever. But if you are religious, if you have religious inclinations, I'm sure your wife has discussed this with you many times.
Mm-hmm.
There's no kind of more interesting angle than that. I basically think all theologians should be scientists. Not to say that they're, not doing a good job if they don't, but if they ignore science, they're really ignoring a possible dimension that could, complement things that are of interest to them. So I feel like the tension, usually it's put as science is being suppressed by religion, but I actually think it's because religious people aren't as interested in science as they could be or should be.
Yeah, I mean, it's been true since the beginning, and I'm talking again about Catholics because that's what I know the most about.
Yeah.
That whenever scientific evidence has come to light, they have not been in denial of it, and I think even Neil deGrasse Tyson said this once, where periodically the Catholic Church has gone back and reinterpreted the Bible in light of new evidence. They've never done that because it's not their job.
Right.
to do that, and so they haven't said, well, the Bible needs to be now interpreted in light of this new evidence as the following thing, because they realize that a lot of these stories and the sources of the stories and the purpose for which these stories were written, the audience for which these stories are for, does not always coincide with the scientific evidence out there. And so
that's right.
There really isn't, and I've made this, and I'll talk about this more, guys, after, because while Brian's here, I want to use Brian, but about my own opinions on this. But there is not a war, in my opinion, between science and religion, and there really never has been. But I'll talk more about that when a little bit later on. So okay, so he presents in the book a picture of Galileo, his life, the way in which he lived. There's been a lot of biographies on Galileo. But it sounds to me like the interesting part of this book, at least to me, is this connection between Galileo's time and the denial of science. So how does he make that connection?
Yeah, I think that element's really interesting. And I think the deep astronomy and Into the Impossible audiences will find the astronomical perspective that Mario brings as a prominent astronomer to light, no pun intended, that he has a different dimension into this book. Just as a historian, of middle or Renaissance art will have a different perspective than a modern artist on, say, Michelangelo or Leonardo da Vinci, whatever. So that makes this book very interesting to people like me. But the history and the kind of obviously the catchy, provocative title that it uses really set things in motion for me wanting to really get into it with Mario. And so I asked him questions, in what sense was he really punished for his beliefs? In other words, if you look at what happened to him, he was forbidden to do something. He not only did what he was forbidden to do, again, I'm taking devil's advocate, Pope's advocate.
Mm-hmm.
He not only did it, he taught it in Italian, which was basically proselytizing a message of that the church had forbidden him to speak. But finally, he also was kind of so in love with the theory that he really kind of presented evidence that isn't fitting. In other words, he was sort of suffering from confirmation bias that you and I talk about quite frequently. And it runs the gamut from, going to the lengths of being punished by the Vatican. Now, what happened to him, his punishment I said I think Bertie Madoff would trade prison cells with Galileo in a heartbeat, because actually part of the interview I have in my Zoom background pictures that I took in 2015 from Galileo's imprisoned villa where he spent the last 8 years of his life. And Tony, I got to tell you, if I ever, have to be imprisoned by the NSF or my funding agencies or whatever,
do that?
I hope it'll be there
NSF
because I already would have been, I suppose, because of all the blunders I've made in my life. But this is a sumptuous villa with grape, figs and olive orchard, and it was not far from. It was about a kilometer. You can see the nun convent where his daughter, one of his daughters, Maria Celeste, was a nun, because she was illegitimate, and back then it was very difficult for women that didn't have legitimate parents. So he was not only permitted to live in a pretty sumptuous villa, he was living near his daughter. So what kind of, oppression and suppression was this? Now, he had to, it's true, he did have to bend down his knee in front of the Pope, but it wasn't like there was Twitter and paparazzi and that, there are paintings that survive. And even from that epoch, even from that situation, where he was forced to bow down and recant that the Earth goes around the sun. Allegedly, Mario debunks this myth or puts test to the myth, perhaps myth, that Galileo actually said under his breath, "It still moves," even despite what the Pope is commanding me to say. In other words, he muttered under his breath, it said, "The Earth still moves." And so Mario has a piece in Scientific American that I'll link folks to in a podcast as well, that he did with Steve Mirsky. And he talks a little bit about how he came to challenge this myth and confront it with facts throughout history. So I think those kinds of things paint a portrait of Galileo as a human being, as a man, not just the true truth seeker at all costs who is punished and tortured for science. That's sort of mythological. There's actually a book called Tortured by Science, or Galileo on Trial, one of these. And again, it's sort of debunking the myth that he was a martyr for science. He was a great man. He was treated unfairly. His message resounds more than ever, but he was no saint. He was not perfect because, like you and me, he was a man.
Yeah. Yeah. So, would you say that getting back to the concept of denying science, or at least I don't know that it's fair to even say that there was a lot of denial of science going on. Well, I guess there was, sure, in Galileo's time. Do you think there's much difference between what's happened several hundred years ago and today with respect to denying science? And why do you think it's so prevalent now? Or is it really prevalent and we've got some kind of bias because we're scientists?
I think the latter. I think you're absolutely right. You see things through this lens of science, and the perspective is, oh yeah, it's very harsh. I think he had a book review in Nature, which was mostly positive about this book, but it also cited a concern that I had. Really the only science that he claims is being denied is global warming in this book, modern science, by say an organization, an entity. That and in other words, there is denial of evolution, but that's not the country's policy or enacted upon some treaty that we withdraw from or something, in the way that global warming is, or climate change. So I think the examples were kind of thin, and he wants to guard against the kind of theocracy or autocracy. But really, the main message he had was about in the book was about climate change denialism. And then secondly, there was another thing that he brought up, just because of the time in which the book is being released, not when it was written, about COVID-19 and how we should listen to scientists. And so we debate that a little bit, because not all the models and not all the scientists have the exact same thing to say. And I actually made the point, not to give myself too much credit, but I did make the point that, look, what Einstein, was he a science denier? I mean, he didn't believe the universe was expanding. He vehemently opposed it. He called Lemaitre's theory of the primeval atom which later became called the Big Bang, he called that an atrocious misapplication of his theory until he was shown evidence to the contrary. Now, you're a pope back in the 1600s. What is your job? Is it to be the final arbiter of scientific truth? I don't think so. I think, I put on my devil's pope advocate hat and said, well, if there was some asteroid coming to the Earth, what would be your role as kind of king or monarch of the planet? Would it be to tell everybody the truth that they're about to die, or would it be to keep peace? And I want people to listen to his answer and see if it convinces them.
Yeah, there's a lot of, to me, science denialism. Okay, you brought up the idea of Einstein, and he didn't like certain ideas, certain scientific theories, but he had good reasons for not liking those things. And in many cases, this idea of quantum mechanics he also didn't like. But he didn't act in bad faith, and to me, that's where a lot of the denialism of today comes from. It's just a willful ignorance that there isn't a good faith attempt to look at the facts. There's just this flat out denialism that's going on in the face of obvious observations. You can debate some of the details, like whether the models are going to be plus or minus 20% or whatever they're going to be, but it's the idea of even the basic methods of science are being denied and even not trusted, and that's, to me, dangerous, right? Especially today, with not just the coronavirus, but also just about everything else. Our existence is going to be threatened by this inability to accept our observations about the world and this lack of trust that goes on. And I think there's probably good reasons for people to not trust authority and not trust science, but at some point, you've got to have a good faith effort at looking at the facts around you, and instead of just throwing your hands up and say, "Well, nothing anybody says in the scientific world I'm ever going to listen to." And right. I don't know if it was like that in Galileo's time, but it sure seems that way today.
Yeah, I think so. I think there's this mythology that we cultivate that we're these walking Wikipedias and we're infallible, at least in the public mind. Oh, trust science. And, I heard it pointed out that it took nuclear physicists working on the Manhattan Project to develop the bomb, but they didn't go around and say, Richard Feynman, you helped develop the bomb. Should we drop it? I mean, he's a very brilliant man. But a politician, Harry Truman, just made that decision. Now, you can argue with who's in politics now, and that's why we live in a democracy. I felt, to be honest with you, I love Mario, but I felt the examples could have been beefed up a little bit. I see people in the chat asking about UFO science. I agree. You can deny it. You can refute different facts that are claimed about the universe, that the Earth is flat. You can refute that with facts, but there's no policy that's coming down next week, or maybe the week after. We'll talk about Sarah Scholes' book about UFOs and this whole culture fueled by billionaires and millionaires, funding this search for UFOs and really popularizing it. And that's a little bit more invidious because it's getting into front page articles in the New York Times month after month. This is happening and releases without any contravailing evidence whatsoever. There's great work being done to debunk these videos that are coming out from fighter pilot. Again, so a pilot's very good. He or she is a great skill, and it's very hard to master it. But can they interpret optical phenomena? Do they know about illusions? Do they know about signal to noise ratios and beam patterns, interference, things in the infrared spectrum, angular resolution? No, of course not. And we don't want them to. I want them to be good pilots. Right. Similar, I want scientists to be good scientists, not be responsible for making all the policy decisions in the world. I think one look at my department or, a physics department anywhere will tell you that, scientists aren't the best politicians.
No, they're not even the best communicators. So there's a lot of, but they're good at interpreting nature, and that's what we want them to be good at. And exactly. It can be other people's job, like you and I, to discuss and communicate their science.
That's right.
Out there. So we don't need them to do that. But okay, quick question. I just want to ask you about, before we started, I saw a comment, and I'm sorry I don't remember who made it. I tried to scroll up and didn't see it. This idea of flat earthers. Would you consider them science deniers, or something else?
I think that I would consider them just ignorant. I wouldn't say that they deny science any more than, if you use a map to get around your city in Florida or here in San Diego, the world sure looks flat, but if you look at it from that perspective, I can put my hand in front of my face and say, oh, nothing is possible to be seen stereoscopically. Oh, but you have a better perspective.
Right.
So I think it's the lack of inquisitiveness to actually follow evidence. Now, if they deny rationality, if you show them evidence, you show them different ways to prove, and it's very simple to do so, you can easily prove that. Now, on the other hand, and that's why the church didn't deny that the earth is spherical, roughly spherical, although there's a great quote, from Isaac Asimov, who says, if you believe the earth is round, you're wrong. Because it's not perfectly round. But if you believe it's not a perfect sphere, it has some distortion. But if you believe the earth is flat, you're also wrong. And you're wrong in a much worse fashion. You're much more egregiously wrong. And I think if you believe something without evidence or in the face of counterfactual evidence, then you can maybe be elevated to the class of denialism. If you believe stuff like, the moon landing didn't happen, there's differences between, believing in conspiracies or that UFOs are here. And that colors a little bit more with political leanings and so forth. So I don't necessarily think that. I actually made a joke yesterday or 2 days ago that although the earth is not flat, the whole universe is known to be flat.
That's right. That's exactly right.
Take comfort in that.
Yeah. So, that's a good distinction. And I guess, for me, when it comes to thinking about the flat Earth, people and the ones that are denying other parts of science, it's more of a trust issue. It's this sort of something about authority that they're just not willing to buy, and they feel like they're being sold a bill of goods by not only the scientific community, but in their leaders and everything else. These same people will go out and have problems with other parts of science as well, not just whether the earth is flat or not. And they seem to want, but on the other hand, they also, the ones that I've seen that are being honest in their investigation of the flat earth actually try to employ some pretty good scientific methods. They're flawed, but at least they're trying to think of it in a way that proves it to them that the earth is flat. And so, one example was during an eclipse, they tried to recreate the shadow going in the opposite way, because it goes the opposite way from west to east, during an eclipse. And so they were trying to even make the disk of the moon smaller than the earth, and they couldn't do it properly because they were using an extended light source. And so they would use a flashlight on a tennis ball, and of course the cone gets really big when you shine it on a wall. Had they used a point source, they would have seen that this would have been a little bit better. It would have actually the shadows would have worked right. So I don't know. They try to do it, but
if you're doing it in earnest, look, again, Galileo didn't prove that the earth goes around the sun. In fact, that wasn't proven until the 17 or 1800s, when we could do measurements of what's called stellar aberration. So if you really want to annoy a scientist, I was talking to a PhD yesterday. I said, prove to me that the sun is the center of the solar system. And he had to think for a long time before he could actually come up with some ideas to prove it without using a rocket ship. And just prove it to me here on Earth. It's very hard to do.
Yes, Copernicus was wrong when he died. Galileo was wrong when he died. Newton was wrong when he died. These are, but they still contributed a lot towards science.
Absolutely,
and so far, Einstein's been right about everything. But who knows where we'll go with this? Okay, we're almost out of time. What's next week? Let's talk about your next interview so people can get a taste of what you're about to do.
I'm going to be interviewing in my controversial cosmology series seminar, and these episodes that I'm calling Pandemic Podcasts. I'm going to be recording with Eric Weinstein of famous Teal Capital. Geometric unity is his new model of the universe. I want to talk to him about that. It'll be the first time he's talking to a physicist, an actual living, breathing physicist, instead of Joe Rogan, who's, I don't believe, a physicist, although who knows.
But he plays one on TV.
That's right. Yeah, he might be a theoretical physicist. I don't know. I'm just a humble experimentalist.
Right.
And then, but maybe next week we'll talk about Sarah Scholes' book called "They Are Already Here." And yesterday I recorded an episode that's coming out on my channel on Sunday for Mother's Day with Sasha Sagan, who's Carl Sagan and Anne Druryon's daughter. And I want to talk about that. We could talk about that next week. We could talk about the Sarah Scholes book. We have a lot of really good interviews coming up. This is on the Arthur C. Clarke Center's Into the Impossible podcast, and on my YouTube channel. You can subscribe to both, please, because actually we do different things. The video ones, we give away, we don't give away anything, and the audio ones, we give away a copy of the book. At least once our local bookstore opens up here, we will give away a copy of the book. And then hopefully people will enter to win that. And then on the video on the YouTube channel, I give away. Well, I don't give away. We do interviews and we add in graphics, links, show notes, exercises for the reader. So I think it's kind of fun. I'm having a lot of fun in this lockdown period, actually.
Dude, you're making some great content, and so I would encourage everybody to get on your channel and subscribe to these podcasts, because these are great people to be discussing all of this with. And recently we talked about this briefly, Freeman Dyson, who has recently passed away, is now also somebody you were able to talk to. So a lot of great people. So definitely check them out, guys. All right. So next week, we'll be back next time. On the 21st, I'll just warn everybody, I think I've got a AAS hangout planned in 2 weeks, but next week we'll be here. So we'll be back with Brian, and we'll talk about some more cool stuff. So thanks, Brian. I know you got to go, so just go ahead and hang up.
Thanks, Tony. I'll hang up now, but you have a great day. And
all right. Yeah, so I will. I'll hang around for a little bit longer and talk to you guys. Hey, Face Roller. Yeah, he's a teacher at UCSD. He's a professor there. Let's see. So let me look at some of your. I was so, because he had a hard cutoff he had to get to. I didn't read a lot of your chat, so let me do that now. Hey, Andrew, it's good to see you again. Varun Vega on Twitch. It's good to see you as well. And better and better. It looks like you're everywhere, man. You're both on Twitch and YouTube. By the way, I am streaming on all the things except for Instagram. I'm not streaming on that, but so I'm everywhere always. So let's see here. Andrew Planet. Science denial is an artifactual expression of our species of adaptations for social order based on physical aggression, aided and abetted by gaslighting. I love it, man. That's awesome. UFO science is denied. No, actually, people, there are actual unidentified flying objects. So people do study what these things are, but what the connection between something that's unidentified in the air and an alien, that connection is probably not science. Galileo's Dream is a good book by Ken Stanley Robinson. That's a good one, Simon. I like that. Yes, that's right, John. He could still entertain guests and even go out into his garden where he could watch apples falling and totally fail to get the hint. I love it. That's great. I do believe in God, but not in a specific one, just someone who created. Okay, that's good. And Architufus is commenting, they're the ones responsible for building schools back in the colonialism era. I think you must be talking about Catholics. And also I wanted to thank Hans Milling for the super chat. Thank you, man. Yes, it will go towards my new camera. I'm using an old Logitech camera right now. As you can no doubt tell, it's not the best quality, but it is getting the job done. So yeah. So thank you, Hans. I appreciate the support. Humans are egotistical and narcissistic, says Varun Vega, and they certainly are self-centered. That's for sure. It's hard to. I like to think they're more empathic than they are, but I don't know. Let's see. The Earth is flat. Evolution is only a theory. COVID is just a flu. That's from Architupus. And you were almost banned, dude, for saying that. Okay, so I think. Let's see. Simon's going, I'm trying to say this with the most respect as possible, but I really appreciate Dr. Keating's transformation and communication style from his SETI Institute lecture days. Good. I guess you weren't happy with those days. But you know, as he will point out, you know, we're all evolving, we're all growing a little bit, and certainly I've made a lot of blunders on streaming online or talking and giving talks. So Tony Switch Thursdays, that's right. So yes, it's been you know, I enjoy talking with him, and he gets access to a lot of really great people, and he's promised that he's going to connect me with some of them. So I wouldn't mind talking to Eric for a while, and I might get Mario back. I have no problem with really just like bearing down on people and trying to get them to say, stuff that they might not ordinarily say. But let me just point out. I want to point out something to you guys. This is when talking about Galileo. Let me see if I can get this switched over. What is that? I'm going to push some buttons here for just a minute. Yeah, here we are. Okay, here is a picture, a very famous picture that was painted depicting the Inquisition of Galileo. And here, I hope you can see. Yes, good. My cursor is here. Here's there's a lot of symbolism here. You have Galileo standing defiantly here off to the right with almost a halo around him, around his head, the arbiter of science. And then standing here is with their backs literally against the wall is the Catholic Church, trying to argue and fight with him about his beliefs and ideas. But one of the, this to me is one of the first examples of the myth of Galileo being this big, arbiter of, defier of the church, in the sense that he was trying to, just say things that put the church at on the defensive, and he was doing those things. But this was painted, if I scroll down here, 1857. This is several hundred years after the actual events took place, and so and this is sort of one of the examples of this, what I think is another myth of this war, so-called war between science and religion. Early on, the church, the Catholic Church, had been very involved in our scientific progress. In fact, they were the only ones in the Western world, at least, progressing things. As early as, I think it was Bede the Venerable, was like in 400. I'm getting my dates very close to 400 AD or so, not too long after Constantine switched to Catholicism, and he was one of the first to write theories about the Earth being round, picking up on the Greeks again and their work. And then we've got there's all the way up through Newton's time, where Isaac Newton was an extremely religious person. In fact, he wrote more religious papers than he did scientific papers, and so he was, he always looked at himself as a religious person first and foremost. So there is room for both. Is the point I'm trying to make. I am personally an atheist, but I respect the history, and I want to look at it with honesty of what has happened in the past with religion. So I think that we too often take these myths and we distort them in ways that are unhealthy. And I think they also breed a lot of the mistrust that we see in the science denialism of today. If people would just, and scientists don't help their case any. We have very prominent scientists out there. Neil deGrasse Tyson's done it. Bill Nye's done it. Although he's not a scientist, he's a communicator. And Richard Dawkins et al. doing some rather intense damage to the scientific cause by just being belligerent towards people of faith. And so I don't think that helps, and I don't think that is it's an honest approach. I think it's just a way of getting science, trying to shove science down people's throats in ways that are inappropriate. And so I feel very strongly about this idea that there is not a war between science and religion. At least there hasn't been in the past. And so with all of this scientism that's been attacking religion, and religion fights back with its trying to be more scientific, using scientific arguments to justify their faith, I think that's also a mistake, right? We have, the creationism is a prime example of that, where we have examples of museums where you can go to and see, these sort of dubious depictions of human beings alongside dinosaurs, and this idea that the Earth really is only 6,000 years old. The literalism of the Bible is, I think, a dishonest portrayal of what the faith is trying to communicate. And so it's been distorted on both sides, but it's also, I think, science doesn't have any real business making these comments about things that aren't scientific, and that's the kinds of things that the scientific people of today are doing. I think it's a disservice. So I don't know. What do you guys think? It's I know that there are a lot of high emotions on this topic. I am not a militant atheist. I think people that are really wreak a lot of havoc in the world by just being so militant about everything and trying to insert science in places where it doesn't belong. So and these ideas where of Galileo being at odds with the church, I think we've all sort of learned now it wasn't quite like that. His prisons were he was a little bit belligerent. He was also part of the problem. So he's also very plagiaristic. He took a lot of people's ideas and made them as if they were his own. He would teach them as if they were his own. So he was part of the problem in that sense as well. And things could have gone a lot differently for Galileo had he maybe shown a little more respect for what he was trying to teach at the time. And if he had just the Pope, as we've recently learned, he just said, "Look, we support what you're doing. The work is valid. Just stop interpreting it in terms of the Bible. Just stop doing that." And that's the job of the church. The Bible is the job of the church. And let us handle that. You handle the science, and we'll be fine. Unfortunately, it didn't work out that way. So so there is no proof for good. If there is good, he wants you to believe, not know. I think you mean God, but I'm a factualist, but I'm not an atheist. That's sort of a apophatism. And Chris goes, "I'm sorry, Tony, I disagree. The likes of Christopher Hitchens, Dawkins, and Krauss are around 90% of the rest of the world. Is just seen as common sense. It's only America that takes offense." Well, okay. So if I've read all of Richard Dawkins' books and a couple of Christopher Hitchens' books, and while I can't cite examples off the top of my head because I don't have that kind of memory anymore, I can tell you that they are making claims in their books that have to do with science disproving God, or that the view of science is the only right view that there is, and that it is the only view of the universe that will ever make sense. And that is where they do humanity and knowledge in general a great disservice, because that's just not true. There are other forms of knowledge that can be gained outside of the realm of science. And so what they tend to do is get away from the boundary of where science works. What is science? Science is our way of understanding the mechanics and the workings of nature. And if it stays in that realm, it does a very, very good job. And the technology that flies out of doing that science is extremely successful. So there's no question of the success of science in the quality of our lives and in the advancement of our technology. But an argument can be made that the scientific progress that we have enjoyed over these past 500 or some odd years, however long it is, has come at the expense of some other levels of knowledge that we are kind of losing touch with. So, to give an example, why are some very fundamental questions that are important to each and every one of us are outside of the realm of science? An example would be, why do I love my wife? these are very basic but highly important questions. Well, I don't have a scientific answer. I could go down to the biological hormonal level and explain why my hormones are reacting the way they are, and why my brain synapses and how they are operating to produce this thing called love, but it doesn't tell me what love is. It falls far short of that. So I am gaining other knowledge about the world and experience about the world in ways that are outside of the world of science. Another example would be morality. Is there an absolute right and wrong to the universe, or is everything relative? These are things that science isn't going to be able to put an experiment on and give you an answer for these things. And yet they are incredibly important sources of information. Why we do what we do. Why is murder wrong? Or is it really wrong, right? It affects our lives, and it is a very important part of who we are, and yet science is not a part of it, okay? Sure, we can give profiles of murderers and serial killers, and we can say, oh, the reason this person is doing it is because he's got some kind of narcissistic personality disorder, and he doesn't have any empathy biologically, and so he murders people. But is that really the whole answer? And so I think we lose sight of the other areas in life where science really doesn't have a lot to say, but and can't really contribute, and yet these people like Hitchens and whom I respect. Okay, I mean, these are people I've read. I buy their books and I listen to their arguments. I just think their arguments are unconvincing because they are being, first of all, belligerent and to the point of just making themselves sound famous or be famous, and to be somewhat argumentative about the topic, which is fine. That's okay. They just want their personality out there, which is part of what makes people famous. But they're also, I think, disingenuous in this insertion of science in places that it really. Richard Dawkins has tried, I think, and it's certainly I think it was in the Selfish Gene, where he tried to invoke scientific reasons for why we behave the way we do, with respect to morality. But I found them very unconvincing. So I would recommend a book to you that I found very good. It was called Monopolizing Knowledge, and it's written by a physicist at MIT who's a devout Catholic. And his name is Ian Hutchison. And that book, more than any other I've read, gives the arguments about why scientism does harm. And people like Richard Dawkins and Christopher Hitchens and Sam Harris, these are all scientistic people. They aren't scientists. They believe in scientism, which is this belief that everything in the universe can be framed in the world of science and in the words of science, and it can be discovered with the methods of science. And so I would encourage you to read that book. If you go to my Amazon page, I have a link to it on there, but you'll find it. It's available on Kindle and on Amazon and all that kind of stuff. And it's called Monopolizing Knowledge, and it's written by a particle physicist, or maybe he's a plasma physicist. I forget. Anyway, at MIT, he's not just some. He's a working, practicing scientist, and so he does a good job, I think, of framing the problem a lot better than I just did. So. There are no absolutes is an absolute statement that contradicts itself, right? So yes, and there's lots of arguments like that end up just being self-contradictory, and I think a lot of the atheists that we see out there are being self-contradictory, and they're trying to just own the religious people. That's the goal, right? Let's own them, because that's what we do now. We own the other side. Whatever the other side is, we just want to own it. And that is such a counterproductive way to behave that, what do you possibly expect to gain from owning the flat earthers? Are you ever going to win that argument? First of all, it's a hopeless, hopeless cause. They aren't going to be convinced, because they're not believing in a flat earth for reasons that have anything to do with rationality. They are believing in a flat earth, this is my theory, because they are part of a community of people of which they are a valued member. And we all want to be a part of a valuable community. Science or the mainstream, whatever, has rejected them in whatever way, and they've found a home among people who believe these weird things, but they are accepted and they are trusted and they are welcomed in. That's why they're flat earthers. They're not flat earthers because they really want this they think that the earth is actually flat. They do, but that's not the real reason why they're there. Because if you somehow could convince them rationally with a beautiful proof that the earth is in fact round, of course we have all this proof to give them, and they go, you're right, the earth is round, I have been wrong. What is the consequence of that admission? They are going to be ostracized from a community that they already feel a very important part of. They will be ostracized from their friends. And suddenly their life has changed. They've got a lot invested in this idea that the earth is flat. And the same is true for a lot of, I had the example and it went away. I don't want to say cult, but a lot of people who were in these cults, they are in them because of the acceptance level. And they aren't interested in a rational argument for why things are the way they are. You're not going to convince them, ever. So why do it? Why get in the people's face and just be belligerent? Are you doing yourself or your cause any good? Has anything ever changed from all the books that Richard Dawkins has written or that Christopher Hitchens has done? Has there been any real change? Has he changed any minds? And what's the point of doing it other than riling up your own side? And yeah, go ahead, rile up your side, get really mad at all the religious people and just own the hell out of them. And then what? What are you going to do with all that anger, right? Have you made any real progress here? So if I don't get it. I mean, I understand why people are angry and upset at people who won't believe in certain parts of science. I get that. It's annoying. It's highly aggravating, and I would argue it's also dangerous. Especially when you've got things like a pandemic to deal with. If we do develop a vaccine, do you honestly think, there was somebody had told me, I think it was a survey had been done where 30% of Americans won't take it. If a vaccine for the COVID-19 coronavirus is developed, 30% of Americans won't take it. Because they don't trust anything scientists say. And why don't they trust it? It's because of these books. God is not great. The Selfish Gene, The God Delusion, The End of Faith. These are all books that preach to a choir that goes then out and causes a lot of damage. And so that's my thinking on it. And I know that I've just pissed off 90% of you. But I like I said, I am an atheist. I cannot get to the point where I believe in a God. But I can certainly respect the thinking and the faith that goes into it. I can't make that leap of faith that religious people can make, but I can respect it. And I can try and understand it better than I do. Morality, right and wrong, imagination, creativity, all of these things are non-scientific, and we should value them every bit as much as we value the scientific method, such as it is. There isn't really a method. It's just a bunch of people trying to pretend there's a method. But it's a very flawed endeavor, full of human foibles. And it also, science itself, depends on very unscientific things. You've heard me say this before. Science, you come up with a new scientific idea that is actually quite plausible, and the first thing you're going to be met with is a bunch of harumphers telling you how full of shit you are, and that you can't possibly be right. And they'll be like, oh, of course you're wrong, this is all crap. I mean, you only have to look at Professor Higgs to realize, that, what it's like to be ridiculed for most of your scientific life, only then later to be found out to be right. So, it's based on very human problems, and we depend on things like creativity. Can you fully appreciate what Einstein went through when he made the leap that, wait a minute, the speed of light is fixed and it's time that is relative to everything and relative to emotion. What kind of creativity would have to make that leap? What do you have in here that lets you make that leap? And science doesn't progress without that kind of quality, without an imagination, without the creativity to take what you've learned, to take the scientific method and use human creativity to make something, to make it grow. So science depends on things that are not scientific. And so I just don't buy it. I don't buy this crap that science is all there is. It's just too narrow. And to be belligerent about it because it's easy to say, well, science is so great because we've done all these things right, and if you don't believe it, you're just a moron, is the wrong approach to take. And it's never, ever made the situation better. No one's been called stupid or a moron and then gone back and go, you know what? I like what Richard Dawkins said. He's actually right. You know, what they're saying is they hate the motherfucker and he wanted, you know, he's an asshole. That's what they're saying. So what good has he done? He's made you feel better because you like him and you follow him and you'll read everything he does and you're like, yeah, Richard, man, own the religious people. I think that's a wrong way to go about it. Okay, so, I've got the vapors now. You guys have given me the vapors. This is a topic I've thought a lot about. Will science prove the probability of God? No, it won't. It won't. It is not a scientific question. But the definition of God is that it is outside of nature. And if it's outside of nature, science has nothing to say. And if you'll think about it, science is getting scarily non-scientific these days with this idea of the many worlds interpretation of quantum mechanics or these bubble universes or these multiverses. You know, all of this stuff is getting scarily non-scientific because there's no way to prove any of this stuff. We're just saying things because the math works out. So are we all Plato? Do we think that mathematics is reality? Because if so, then all of these things are true. But, you know, or do we want to see an experiment that is devised that can be shown with observations that every decision we make branches off into another universe? That to me would be science. But to say that that's what happened, or it seems like a good idea, which is what Sean Carroll says, then that to me is not very scientific. It's not a scientific statement. So be careful. Just be careful. So anyway, science is part of philosophy. Hans, dude, I really think I haven't looked at the viewership, but I bet it's plummeted. It's probably just gone way down. Oh, there's 56 of you here. Well, you've stuck around. I will stop ranting. I want to give more concrete examples of the books I've read and why I think they're misleading or at least dishonest. And I think, you know, look, I get it. Christopher Hitchens was a very smart man, and all of these guys are. They have good points, and I read some of their points resonate with me. I just feel like it's coming from a place of all or nothing. Right? Science is all there is. And if you think of anything else as being true, then you're an idiot. And that's certainly the way Richard Dawkins approaches the subject. You know, you're just a moron. And, you know, I like Bill Maher. I watched the Bill Maher show, or at least I used to when I had HBO. I can't afford it anymore. But when I was watching Bill Maher every week, and you know, he'd occasionally have Richard Dawkins on. And the last interview they had with him, and they were talking about religion. Of course, we all know what Bill Maher thinks of religion. I actually came away a little bit angry, and I actually agreed with 90% of what they said, but it was the way they said it that actually made me angry. I just like, why are you guys doing this? You know, it's like they just want to be like Donald Trump, only on the left. They just want to make people react. They just want to say things that make you mad, or that make other people mad, or that make themselves feel good, or their fanboys to feel good. And it just makes the situation so much worse. We're already so tribal. We're already so insular in our thinking that if you're outside of our little group, then you just suck. And, you know, there's no intermingling anymore. There's no, you know, like, for example, I don't feel like I have a place. I don't feel like I have a real proper community where I can be a lover of science and appreciate the wonder of the universe through the eyes of science, and also really value the ideas of non-scientific concepts and those in religion. I am not going to sit here and be a defender of Catholics. They have a lot to answer for, right? That church has got a lot of problems. I am not going to sit here and say they are without guilt, and they in so many ways. In fact, it's gotten so bad that my wife, who is a devout Catholic, has actually left the church in terms of going to Mass because of this priest scandal thing. She can't reconcile the church leadership as the church as it is today with what the church has always taught and what she believes in the church doctrine. So she's actually kind of left the church a little bit in the sense that she still believes in what the Catholics believe in, but she's lost faith in the church itself. And so I'm not going to defend what they've done. They've got a history that we all know about, and of course anybody who tries to is also being disingenuous. But they also have a lot of contributions. The first person there was a friar, and I forgot his name now because I'm old, who first came up with the idea before, I think, Fred Hoyle did, of an expanding universe. Not Fred Hoyle, he called it the Big Bang. But before, I think it was in the early 20th century, the late 19th century, this friar was one of the first to come up with this idea of the Big Bang. And of course, we all know Newton was a big contributor, and there have been friars and priests and monks all throughout the history who have contributed scientific knowledge, very valuable scientific knowledge for humanity. So we've got to acknowledge that, right? We just can't ignore it, and we got to be careful of our myths, like the Galileo myth and other things about how that whole thing transpired. Maybe there's a little bit more to the story, right? So. Okay. Oh, wow. It's okay. It's time to go. I don't know. Yes, thank you. It was Lemaitre. Am I saying it right? Yes, thank you, Sir Tall Paul. Yes, that's who it was. That's the one. And Simon, you did it also. So yes, thank you. So there we go. Thank you. And Galaxia, you said it also before I did. So you guys know more about this crap than I do. So good for you guys. I'm just sitting here rambling. And Hans Milling, it's all about survival. In the old days, belonging to a group secured your survival. That's why people worship famous people like Elon Musk, because nobody wants to be in a bad standing with the king. It's true. I mean, there's definite survival advantages to being in a group. And human beings, I mean, anybody who's in America, I don't know about you guys in Europe, I haven't heard about any of these protests, but I certainly have heard about them here, that people are protesting being under lockdown. They would rather be out and about and risk the virus than risk all the rest of us for getting the virus, than they would rather stay at home, because staying at home and being separated is very hard for human beings to do. So we have these protests where people just want to leave and they want to do what they want to do and take their own chances, and the myth there is that they're only affecting themselves, right? The myth there is that, well, I don't care if I get it. If it's my time, it's my time. Well, maybe not so much. I don't personally want to get it either. And now you're endangering me because what if I, accidentally catch it from you, right? I mean, are you passing judgment on whether I can get it or not get it? So there's this selfishness there that is a little bit alarming, but we've got these protests. They don't want to be told what to do, and they don't want to be told to be locked down. And so there's these protests here where people are just doing what they want to do anyway. And it's only going to get worse. And so it is, there is this sort of herd mentality where we don't want to be cooped up. We don't want to be by ourselves. Being in a group is very, 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 very important to human beings. So you're right, Hans. That's a good point. Okay, so let me read what Vernon Vanga says. There's an analogy of science. When people try to force a religion onto some group of people, like Europe and Africa, there is science on religion. Let them believe in what they want to believe. Yes, well, I mean, that's certainly true. And Neil Yu is, Tony, what do you think we lost when they burned the ancient library of Alexandria? Oh my God, who can calculate that? What a lot. All of this knowledge had been stored in a library that we don't even know what was all the accumulated knowledge from the Egyptians and the times and the centuries and the millennia before had been gathered in one spot and burned to the ground. I think it was in Cleopatra's time, but I don't know for sure. It would have been right close to the time of the new millennia, going from BC to BCE to the Common Era, and I think it was around that switching period. I don't think Christ was alive then. It might have been before him or just after him. I can't remember. But yeah, I mean, the amount of knowledge that would have been lost in Alexandria is incalculable. It would be probably equivalent to the entire internet being wiped out. That's basically all of our knowledge is stored on the internet now. And so if it had somehow all been erased, it would be an equivalent thing to that. So yeah, it was quite a loss, and who knows how far that set us back, right? We had gained this knowledge, and it wasn't until say 300 or 400 years later when people started to apply some of these principles to regain that knowledge that we had. Religion doesn't destroy everything, Tuba Pep. It doesn't. I mean, that's just you're just wrong when you say that. That's just not a true statement. So let's see. From the topic astronomy, though, you should make a separate channel for philosophy. Perhaps, Hans. The topic this sort of brought up this discussion with Galileo and science denialism and lack of trust in science, and then whenever someone brings up the scientistic people, the scientism in the world, I get a little bit angry because I'm upset about how that is ruining things, and I do believe it is. It's wrong because religion doesn't ruin everything. How can any one thing ruin everything? What exactly does that even mean, Tula Pip? I mean, science ruins everything. It doesn't. I mean, I'm still here. My room is still here. My property, everything is still. What does it ruin? And what does it even mean to say it ruins stuff? What is it taking away from your quality of life personally? What is it taking away from all of our quality of life collectively? I mean, it doesn't ruin everything. Science doesn't make everything great. That's also a wrong statement. Okay, so what does that even mean that it ruins everything? It's wrong. I'm sorry, dude. Giordano Bruno, he proposed that the stars were distant suns surrounded by their own planets, and he raised the possibility that these planets might foster life of their own. Yes. I prize human liberty and freedom, but I'm staying on lockdown. Just saying. Yeah, I don't want to get it. And if I'm going to be around other people, I'm probably going to get it. So, it's on me, I guess, I'm not going to suddenly decide, oh, well, I don't care if I get it now. I'm going to go out and just endanger others. I actually have a higher moral code than that. What I do affects other people, and I actually realize that. So I'm going to act accordingly. I realize that, well, gosh, I may be willing to take the risk of getting this virus, but others might not be. And perhaps, just maybe, I should think about them a little bit. I mean, this level of morality that we all have, it's varying depending on who you are. Many people are of the opinion that it's totally fine. This pandemic, you know what? It's a pandemic. You're going to have a certain amount of collateral damage. Deal with it. And I'm not going to even bother to minimize it. Or should I maybe work at minimizing it and do my part to perhaps minimize the number of deaths that occur? Well, that is a very personal question that you must answer yourself. And many of us are choosing to answer it in the way of, it's a risk I think we should all take. And even though my actions affect you, I'm going to do it anyway. That's just the way human beings are. So we have to accept that. I have to plan accordingly. I have to know that if I do go out, which I haven't left my property more than a handful of times in the past few months for this very reason. And sadly, poor Charlotte, she goes out and does all the shopping and does all the stuff for us because I'm older than her and she doesn't want me to be at risk for it. So, we make these sacrifices. So it's all something you have to ask yourself. Yes, you're willing to accept the risk of catching the coronavirus, but you're not the only one in the world. And so do you acknowledge that, or do you just behave as if you're the only one in the world? And surprisingly, a lot of the people who are behaving this way would consider themselves to be religious people. So are they acting this way because of their religion? I would argue no. Their religion would probably tell them not to, and to be more conscious of those who are less fortunate than them, and to perhaps protect those who are the weakest among us. And yet there are other factors at work here, right? There's political factors, economic factors, all these other things that would cause that person who would otherwise might think of others who are more at risk than themselves to go out and endanger them, because their own personal livelihood is at stake, or their own survival may be perceived to be threatened, and maybe it actually is threatened, and so they would act accordingly on that way. There's lots of reasons why people would do it, and it's my job to understand that is out there and act according to my own set of constraints, and my own risk tolerance. And so I probably said too much. Anyway, if you've unsubbed to the channel, I understand. I do have. I don't usually talk like this on the channel, so I probably have made a mistake. So I will stop. And any thoughts on the coming Crew Dragon launch? Yes, Chris. Let's switch gears. It's a shame Boeing got set back. Yes, it's very true. Boeing's in trouble as a company. I'm going to talk about this more tomorrow on my weekly space roundup, which I do live on YouTube and on Twitch on Gibson Pick channel. And I think it's great. I'm very excited about it. I think that it'll be wonderful, to get back into the space business of launching people again. And so I'm really excited about this. I may try. So I think it's May 26th is the launch date. Maybe it's the 27th. Anyway, I'm going to actually try and go. I think the Kennedy Space Center, the visitor complex, I think opened this week. And, talking about social distancing and whether, it's a good idea to go, I won't go to the Kennedy Space Center, but I say that because, if Kennedy is open, then they'll probably have launch viewing opportunities to see the launch. I still won't go there. But I do have a boat, and I would take my boat to Mosquito Lagoon, which is just outside of the launch complex, and watch it from there. So I'm considering doing that. To do that, though, I've got to get my boat trailer more worked. So I hope to see the launch, but I don't know if I'm going to make it or not. I'll definitely watch it online as well. I think this is a great time. I think SpaceX as a company is doing most of the right things, and I'm not going to comment on Elon Musk, but the company of SpaceX is actually quite exciting and invigorating. Boeing, not so much. Not quite sure if they're even going to survive the way things are going for them. So anyway, it's the 27th. Okay, thanks, Hans. So yeah, I'm gonna definitely. I'm definitely. Well, okay, Tuba Pip. So yeah, I don't see. Okay, I'll give you that it hasn't. I'm just going to take issue with one word. You say that religion has always impeded science. And I'm going to just say you need to get rid of that word always. It has impeded science. It has slowed things down, made things difficult at times, but it has also progressed science. It has been responsible for adding scientific knowledge to the world. So please acknowledge that too. It hasn't always done it. And so these words you're using, always and everything, we need to get away from that. It's not true. It is, yes, it has impeded some things. It has made things more difficult. It has been an obstacle at times. And it has ruined some things in the world, for sure. Anybody who has followed this pre-scandal can say that is probably a very ruinous thing to have been doing. That is behavior that is no one can justify. Certainly the Inquisitions and all of this stuff that we know from history that has happened. None of this can be justified morally. So, but always and everything, let's just maybe not do that, okay? So let's see. All right. So there's a SETI event happening in 20 minutes. I'm going to get off. Thank you, Andrew Planet, for letting people know. Okay, so I think I will stop now. It is already 15 minutes past my time. Whew. Okay. Well, everyone, I want to thank you all so much for watching. And as always, oh, Brian, by the way, you probably got all of this is streaming on your channel. You might want to edit out the last 30 minutes of what I just did for your own channel. So, because this is also streaming on his. All right. Okay, guys, I'll be back tomorrow night for the weekly space roundup, 8 p.m. Eastern time. Also, on twitch.com slash or twitch.tv/Gibson Picks. I'll be on the Clear Skies Network as well tomorrow night with the weekly space roundup. So join me there, and I'll talk more about the SpaceX flight and other things. So on behalf of Brian Keating, thank you all so much for watching. And as always, keep looking up.